Immediately we had proclaimed our independence in August 45.
KGB and CIA reportedly blackmailed Indonesian President Sukarno with sex tapes, and instead of being ashamed, the president asked for extra copies. What was the story behind this that it was considered a legitimate ops tactics? Greetings, fellow history enthusiasts. Welcome back to Abundant Fi Wisdom, the go-to place for captivating stories from the past. Today, we delve into a fascinating chapter involving international intrigue, political manipulation, and an unexpected twist that will leave you astounded. Our story takes us to the 1960s, a time when the Cold War tensions were at their peak, and nations were engaged in covert activities that would shape the course of history. When Indonesian President Sukarno visited Moscow in the 1960s, the KGB sent glamorous young women posing as air hostesses to his hotel. When they later tried to blackmail him with a sex tape, Sukarno was apparently delighted. Legend has it he even asked for extra copies. As the Cold War unfolded, intelligence agencies played a crucial role in influencing global events. One such agency, the KGB, was known for its cunning strategies and covert operations. Today, we explore an incident that involves the KGB, the Indonesian President Sukarno, and a scandal that rocked the political landscape. It is said that the KGB had a penchant for using compromising material, and in this case, they reportedly had sex tapes featuring Indonesian President Sukarno. The allegation suggests that the KGB attempted to blackmail President Sukarno with these explicit tapes, hoping to exert influence over the leader of Indonesia. Now, imagine the shockwaves this revelation sent through diplomatic circles. Headlines across the globe carried the sensational news, raising questions about the lengths to which intelligence agencies would go to achieve their goals. Now, here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of succumbing to shame or bowing to the pressure, President Sukarno allegedly responded in a most surprising manner. It's rumored that rather than cowering in embarrassment, President Sukarno astonishingly requested extra copies of the tapes. This audacious response left many baffled and intrigued. So, what happened next? How did this scandalous episode play out on the global stage? And what impact did it have on Sukarno's presidency and international relations? Now, as we pivot from the covert world of international intrigue, let's dive deeper into the rich history of Indonesia. A nation with a storied past, shaped by centuries of cultural diversity, political upheavals, and struggles for independence. On August 17, 1945, Indonesia proclaimed its independence from the Netherlands, which had maintained colonial domination over the Indonesian archipelago for more than 3.5 centuries. Up to 1949, the new republic was forced to withstand the former metropolis's efforts to restore its colonial regime in the country. The main tasks of the newly sovereign state in the years 1945 to 1949 were to defend its independence, to strengthen its sovereignty, and to achieve international recognition. Western powers, the USA and Great Britain, were inclined to directly and indirectly support the Netherlands' efforts to re-establish its dominant influence on the archipelago. The Indonesian leaders used the framework of the Cold War, while appealing to the Western powers to put pressure on the Netherlands to stop its military aggression against the new republic, while at the same time they were trying to get support from the newly independent countries of Asia and Africa, as well as from the USSR and the socialist camp. Under Soviet initiative, the Indonesian question was put on the agenda of the UN Security Council. During this period, the Indonesian Republic was officially and unofficially recognized by many countries, including Western powers. In 1947, Indonesia signed a friendship agreement with Egypt, which marked a great success for the young republic's diplomacy. The republic also took steps towards closer relations with the countries of the socialist camp, firstly with the USSR. On January 26, 1948, A Soviet chargé d'affaires in Czechoslovakia reported to his ministry that he had received a letter from the special envoy and Minister Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Indonesia, Sukarno, containing a proposition to establish diplomatic relations between the USSR and Indonesia. On May 22, 1948, in the Soviet embassy in Prague, Sukarno and the Soviet extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador to Prague exchanged notes about the establishment of consular relations and the mutual exchange of consuls. Yet under Dutch military and political pressure, the Indonesian government failed to ratify this agreement. Late in 1949, Indonesia and the Netherlands met at the Round Table Conference and reached a number of agreements. The Netherlands recognized the sovereignty of Indonesia but reserved important positions in political, economic, and military spheres. Indonesia was divided into 16 semi-independent states, among which the Republic of Indonesia was the strongest. It proved impossible to agree about the future of West New Guinea, West Irian. The Indonesian delegation insisted that this area was part of Indonesia, but the Netherlands was determined to maintain its position there. Eventually, the Indonesian side conceded that the status quo should prevail, with the stipulation that the area's political status would be determined through negotiations between the Netherlands and Indonesia in the course of the next year. Sovereignty was officially transferred on December 27, 1949. On January 25, 1950, after some hesitation, the Soviet Union officially recognized Indonesia upon request from the Netherlands. On February 3, 1950, the Indonesian Prime Minister sent a return telegram confirming the receipt of the Soviet telegram of recognition. This date is considered the official date of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the USSR and Indonesia. In 1950, under the influence of Indonesian nationalism, all semi-independent states united with the Republic of Indonesia into the unitary state. This period of Indonesian history from 1950 till 1959 is usually described as the period of liberal democracy. On April 1950, a high-level Indonesian delegation arrived in Moscow to hold talks about an exchange of diplomatic missions. In 1950, the USSR supported Indonesia's membership in the UN, but no practical steps were taken towards the exchange of diplomatic missions and the development of Soviet-Indonesian relations in the years 1950 to 1954. Until 1952, the Indonesian governments were headed by leaders of right-wing parties who maintained a pro-Western foreign policy. Nevertheless, despite US pressure, in April 1950, Indonesia established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, and the first Chinese ambassador arrived in Jakarta in August 1950. A new stage in Soviet-Indonesian relations began in 1952 when the direction of Indonesian domestic politics changed. Leadership positions were gradually taken by centrist and leftist forces of the Indonesian Nationalist Party, PNI. They were inclined to dismiss openly pro-Western foreign policy in favor of a more balanced, truly independent and active course. The possibility of exchanging diplomatic missions with the USSR was put on the agenda once more. After Ali Sastroamid Djojo, a leftist leader of the PNI, came to power in March 1954, the long-awaited exchange of embassies between the USSR and the Republic of Indonesia at last took place. The first Indonesian ambassador Subandrio arrived in Moscow, and the first Soviet ambassador D.A. Zhukov opened the Soviet diplomatic mission in Jakarta. Zhukov, an experienced Soviet diplomat, started to establish friendly personal ties with ruling leaders of the Indonesian state and influential persons in Indonesian political and social circles. To this end, he used not only diplomats of the Soviet embassy but also representatives of Soviet culture and art. The establishment of full diplomatic relations gave impetus to the broad development of active mutual contacts in the fields of science, culture, literature, art, and sport. These contacts were meant to serve as propaganda by showing the superiority of socialism over capitalism. Many declarations were made of the peaceful intentions of the Soviet people and peaceful character of the Soviet foreign policy. For this purpose, the Soviet government widely used the specially created Soviet Peace Committee headed by N.S. Tikhonov, a well-known poet in the USSR. The Soviet leadership was very interested in weakening Western influence over Indonesia. So, the USSR promoted increasing and strengthening relations between Indonesia and the PRC as well as with countries in Asia and Africa that were friendly to the USSR. This same period also featured a breakthrough in Indonesian-Chinese relations. The PRC was very interested in developing ties with Indonesia as well. Close friendly ties between the USSR and China still existed, so the Soviet ambassador was always ready to give friendly advice and a helping hand to the less experienced Chinese ambassador. In their turn, Chinese diplomats were glad to share with Soviet comrades important information acquired from Indonesians and other sources. Ali Sastroamid Djojo's government markedly switched policy in favor of strengthening ties with Afro-Asian countries. In 1954, Indonesia took part in 2 conferences of Asian prime ministers, along with India, Burma, Ceylon, and Pakistan, the first held in April 1954 in Colombo and the second in December 1954 in Bogor. As a result of these meetings, the first conference of 29 Asian and African countries was held in Bandung in April 1955. Indonesia hosted the conference despite the remnants of the radical Islamic group Darul Islam still active in its territory. The main themes of the conference were the strengthening of Afro-Asian solidarity in the struggle against imperialism and peaceful coexistence in the face of the Cold War. The USSR, the majority of which is situated in Asia, made every effort to get an invitation to the conference, but to no avail. Despite this, the Soviet Union considered it to be of great value for diminishing Western positions in Asia and Africa, and highly praised the conference itself and widely propagated its decisions, especially the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence or Pancil. With great concern, the Soviet Union followed the Western powers' efforts to create the Southeast Asian political military bloc SEATO, which was aimed against leftist forces and national liberation movements in the region. The USSR highly praised Indonesia for refusing to join the bloc and supported Indonesia's intention to take the course of non-alignment. Indonesia's closer cooperation with the USSR, the PRC, and other socialist countries consolidated its position in relations with the Western powers. In 1956, the Indonesian government unilaterally abrogated the still existing Round Table agreements with the Netherlands. But the West Irian problem remained unsolved. While all previous Indonesian governments had tried to settle the question through direct negotiations with the Netherlands, Ali Sastroamid Djojo's government brought the West Irian question to the UN. The USSR unconditionally supported Indonesia in its efforts, but they were unsuccessful. So instead, Indonesia decided to take the solution of the West Irian problem into her own hands. A new and strong impetus for the development of Soviet-Indonesian relations was given by the mutual state visits of President Sukarno to the USSR in the summer 1956, and the head of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR K.E. Voroshilov to Indonesia in May 1957. The rate and volume of mutual trade were markedly growing and various forms of economic cooperation were fast developing. In August 1956, the first trade agreement between the Soviet Union and Indonesia was signed, and in September the first general agreement on economic and technical cooperation was concluded. The USSR granted Indonesia a loan of $100 million on favorable terms, and extended technical assistance in constructing a superphosphate plant, a highway, rice plantations on Kalimantan and other projects. In January 1959, a protocol to the general agreement was signed which specified the details. But not all Indonesian leaders and influential groups approved of Soviet-Indonesian rapprochement. Some circles tried to undermine the USSR's role in the strengthening Asian and African solidarity movement, insisting that the USSR was not an Asian country. The consolidation of leftist forces inside Indonesia had provoked a number of military mutinies in different parts of the country. These uprisings were supported by rightist circles in the capital. In response, in February 1957, Indonesian President Sukarno declared the end of that liberal democracy model and transitioned to a new political system which he called guided democracy, in which he took upon the role of the main political authority. President Sukarno got support from the military forces headed by General Nasution. On March 14, 1957, martial law was proclaimed in the Republic of Indonesia. The Indonesian leadership's departure from the principles of liberal democracy and the concentration of state power in the hands of President Sukarno provoked a highly negative reaction in Western countries. This attitude forced Indonesia to look for moral and political support from the USSR. In 1958, a new Soviet ambassador B.M. Volkov arrived in Jakarta. Indonesian leaders were eager to explain to the Soviet side their political maneuvers, referring to a number of military coups d'états which were taking place at that time in Asian countries. Indonesian leaders expressed their great concern about the establishment of dictatorial military regimes in neighboring Thailand and Burma. Indonesia pointed out its highly negative attitude to the deployment of foreign military forces and bases on its own and nearby territories, and hoped for Soviet support in this matter. The exchange of high-level visits greatly intensified, and the economic, military, and technical cooperation broadened. See, for example, the invitation to Juanda in an economic cooperation. In September 1958, the USSR confirmed its agreement to deliver military equipment and arms to Indonesia. The Soviet Union and other socialist countries started to send Indonesia both civil and military aircrafts and ships. On July 5, 1959, Indonesian President Sukarno, supported by the military leadership, declared a return to the 1945 constitution. A new historical period began in Indonesia, the period of guided democracy, when Soviet-Indonesian ties continued to widen and strengthen with renewed intensity, especially in the military sphere. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Join us on Abundant Phi Wisdom as we continue to uncover the fascinating stories that shape our world. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop learning. This is Abundant Phi Wisdom, signing off. Take care.